My dear brother, Brigham Young, said of me at the end of my life,
"She had suffered much, had been through many hardships and trials, and with all this had stayed faithful and true to her family and church. She has left her descendants a great legacy, a heritage of faith, courage, and endurance in adversity. We are indebted to her for that and for her life. She was truly a pioneer. She left 8 children, 83 grandchildren, and here is her story."
Boston was an exciting area to grow up in. My great-grandfather, Joseph Young, had been born in Boston, Massachusetts on the 12th of February, 1729, and christened in the famous Old South Church there. He was a surgeon in the French and Indian War, and he treated the injured. After the war, he settled in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, where he combined his practice of medicine and farming. He married Elizabeth Hayden, a widow, on the 21st of August, 1759, after he treated her father, who had cancer. They were the parents of 6 children, who were all born in Hopkinton. My father, John Young, was the 3rd child. In 1769, Dr. Joseph Young died, leaving his wife Elizabeth, age 40, with 6 children between the ages of 3 and 10. My father, John, was 6 years old at that time. During the next 4 years, after her husband's death, Elizabeth lost her possessions. She was forced to send her children out to work for their keep. My father, John, married Abigail Howe on the 31st of October, 1785, in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. My mother was described with blue eyes and yellow-brown hair with natural waves and ringlets. She had a gentle and lovable disposition with a doll-like face. She was also very pious. My parents were devoted to the Methodist religion, and their precepts of morality were sustained by their good example. I was taught to live a strict moral life. I recollect being taught to pray and obey my father and mother. Lorenzo wrote of his father that he was at first an Episcopal Methodist, but later became a Reformed Methodist. There was affection, but it was controlled. It was a home of Puritan influence. Although these traits were modified by the most liberal Methodist faith, all the children put religion foremost in their life. They were industrious and resourceful, hard workers and local supporters of the family. It was a hard life in colonial American frontier. In 1813, my father moved our family to Aurelius, Cayuga, New York. It was there a year later that I met and married my husband, James Little. A year after, in 1815, my mother passed away at the age of 49 years old. She suffered from tuberculosis, and along with the many moves and giving birth to 11 children, all under primitive pioneer conditions, wore her body out. My husband, James Little, had been born in 1790 in Ireland. He had immigrated to America when he was 10 or 12 years old with his parents. My husband was a wonderful man. He was a short, well-knit man with great powers of endurance. He was never known to complain of being weary. He slept about 4 hours out of 24 hours, or worked the remainder of the time. It is also said that he was a well-read and intelligent man who possessed quite a collection of books. On January 22nd of 1816, our first son arrived, Edwin Sobieski.
You
In 1818, a daughter, Eliza, was born to James and Susannah. In 1822, the baby Eliza passed away. Infant deaths were common in that day, but they were never easy to bear, and James and Susannah must have grieved for this little girl. It was with a heavy heart that James began carving a tombstone for her. It was never finished. However, it was found still in the basement of the house 55 years later. Their second son, Feramorz, was born on the 14th of June of 1820. Then on the 14th of September 1822, James Jr. was born.
In March of 1816, James bought a farm of 50 acres. James would raise vegetables and sell them in Auburn, which was 4 miles away. He was the first man in New York to sell seeds and packages. Also, he introduced tomatoes for table use. Love apples, as tomatoes were called, were considered to be poisonous and grown for decoration only. In order for James to sell tomatoes, he had to get a permit from the governor of New York.
Here are pins, papers and needles and pins, tracts upon popular sins, any of which I will sell you. And here are the seeds of asparagus, lettuce, beets, onions, and peppergrass from the limited society, seeds of all kind and variety. I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler from Connecticut. I'm a peddler, and don't you...
James and Susannah worked hard on their farm. James frequently visited Auburn, the county seat, 4 miles distant, to dispose of his produce and bring home supplies. Near the road was a deep hole from which sand had been taken out for building purposes, which James noticed as he went to Auburn. It is supposed that the bank caved in after he had gone over the road. Returning home in the darkness of night, the wheels on one side of his wagon slipped into the pit, turning over and pinning him under the loaded wagon, and thus he was found dead the next morning. The horse, however, had worked loose and was feeding nearby. This was the last week in November of 1822.
Edwin was 6, Feramorz 2, and James 2 months. Luckily, my brothers Brigham and Lorenzo lived close to me and were a great comfort and help. I started a catering business after this to support my family. I was left with 3 young children. At a printers' convention banquet where I was catering, I met Richard Oliphant from a nearby city. He was an influential printer in that city. We had a son and named him Charles Henry Oliphant. Soon after the birth of the son, Richard left, claiming there was too much difference in our social status. With my 4 small children, we moved to Mendon, New York. Here in 1829, I married William B. Stilson. We had 3 children, Emmeline, who died young, William Lacey, and Cornelia Ann. It was in Mendon that I heard of a new church organized by a prophet Joseph Smith, and I was soon baptized. Mr. Stilson deserted our family, leaving me in poor circumstances. Later, we located Mr. Stilson in St. Louis, Missouri. He was in the Army and did again resume the responsibility of his family until he died of lung fever in 1844. After Mr. Stilson's death, I married Alonzo Pettingill, who died in the spring of 1849. Again, I was left alone. In the spring of 1849, my brother Brigham Young helped me and my daughter Cornelia come to the valley of the Great Salt Lake. We came in the company of my son, James A. Little. In June of 1849, we started on our journey across the plains. It was very rainy and muddy, and we suffered many inconveniences, but nothing compared to some who traveled in extreme cold weather and others who were on rations, like some of the handcart companies who had to walk every step of the way. When we camped at night, we made big bonfires, and the young folks sang, danced, played games. We made our own amusement and had a happy time. We did start in a pleasant time of the year, June. We saw great herds of buffalo and had plenty of meat, both fresh and dried. We fared better than we did after arriving in the valley. Of course, it was not all sunshine and pleasure. We had some very disastrous stampedes and many dangerous accidents, but take it all around, we fared much better than most of the immigrants who came so early. We arrived in Salt Lake City on the 17th of October, 1849. When I arrived in the Salt Lake Valley, my son James provided a home for Cornelia and I. Due to years of hardship, I passed away on the 5th of May, 1852. The strength and faith and hope of our pioneer families encourage us to walk in faith to the edge of the light and beyond, into the unknown. After the trial of our faith, Jesus Christ once again shines the light ahead of us, and our journey of faith in every footstep continues. I share the feelings of Heber J. Grant, who said, "I can never think of the pioneers, but I am full of admiration and gratitude, and utter a prayer to the Lord to help me, as one of the descendants of that noble band, to be loyal, to be true, to be faithful as they were."
But if our lives
Dear family, as we adjourn till next year, whatever our trials may be, whether declining health, sickness, addictions, relationships, money, or our livelihood, let us walk in the footsteps of our beloved pioneers. We must be sure that the legacy of faith received from them is never lost. Let their heroic lives touch our hearts, and especially the hearts of our children.
all is well.